This is New York City, but not the one you know. Among the glass towers of Lower Manhattan, and within earshot of honking yellow cabs, stands all that's left of Little Syria, once home to a thriving Arab community. Today, only a handful of buildings remain.
It's an amazing thing that these three buildings survived when so many hundreds of other buildings and streets are totally wiped out.
And Little Syria faces new, existential threats as construction projects continue to move into Lower Manhattan, changing the face of this once historic area. Located on Manhattan's Lower West Side, New York's Syrian Quarter was once a tough, working-class neighborhood home to a number of nationalities. There were Syrians, Lebanese, Palestinians, Armenians, Greeks and more, living in hundreds of low-rise buildings. But nowadays, the area shows little connection to its past.
There has almost never been a development over time that has been so intentional and so violent as to what has happened to the Little Syrian neighborhood in the Lower West Side.
Much of this part of New York was razed to make way for new construction projects, such as the World Trade Center, as the city's population boomed in the 20th century. The government used eminent domain to seize property and demolish it.
This area, this Little Syrian neighborhood, the Lower West Side, is a perfect example of how government development projects can totally transform a neighborhood and a part of American history until there's almost no trace of what is left.
Todd Fine and Joseph Svalak are local activists. They're campaigning to preserve what's left of Little Syria and offer walking tours to introduce tourists and New Yorkers alike to the vanishing neighborhood. One stop is the Battery Tunnel, built in the mid-1940s to connect Brooklyn to Manhattan.
A lot of people ask, what happened to the Syrian neighborhood, the Syrian quarter, and you can see pretty clearly right here with the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel ramps. They destroyed several blocks of the entire area. It's a tragedy for all immigrant groups, but especially for Arab Americans, I think, who have been struggling to tell their story.
And there's little left of Arab America on display. Despite a park bench celebrating early immigrants, all that remains of Little Syria is confined to half a block on Washington Street, once the beating heart of the community. The St. George's Syrian Catholic Church, the downtown community house, and a tenement building at 109 Washington Street.
So you had the eminent domain action, the block below for the Battery Tunnel that forced people out, and then 3 blocks above you had the eminent domain action of the World Trade Center being built. So outside of private investment that would tear down these other buildings, these few streets in between remained.
While the church has won landmark status from the city and is protected from demolition, it currently houses a Chinese restaurant for the neighboring Holiday Inn Hotel. The other buildings have a less certain future.
The tenement behind me was built in the latter part of the 19th century. The 1885 beautiful veneer brick facade with cast iron swag lintels is an architectural statement in itself. Very simplified, very classic. The community house was used for the social and educational betterment and the medical facilities for the poor immigrants in the neighborhood, and the money was given by the wealth of Wall Street for the poor living in their midst.
What are some of the consequences this building could face?
It could face demolition right now, depending upon what the owner wants to do with it. It's the story of immigrant heritage that's represented in these 3 buildings, and the tenement, luckily next to a settlement house and a church, should be saved because it's the only one left. Would you tear down the last tenement in Chinatown, the last tenement in Little Italy? Why tear down the last tenement in Little Syria? I mean, here it is.
Arab immigration to America started in the late 19th century, when the silk industry was hit by the opening of the Suez Canal. Most of those who settled in the country had to pass through Ellis Island, a short boat ride from Manhattan, and the busiest immigration inspection station in the US at the time. Today, the building is a museum.
It's a very powerful space. The hope and the dreams of all the people that came through here, it really it still resonates to this day, I think.
This is Stephen Lean, director of the American Family Immigration History Center on Ellis Island. And collected artifacts here show what immigrants traveling from the Arab world felt was important enough to bring with them.
A lot of the artifacts that we have are textiles and clothing. The Thomas family came from what is now Lebanon, and I believe they were in the textile business. So a lot of what they brought with them and a lot of what they had would be textile related. It seems a little strange that it's just this very small thing, but there is a set of tweezers that was brought by a Syrian immigrant, but I think that's characteristic of how little people would actually bring with them. What would you bring with you? What's feasible? What can you fit in a single case?
Little Syria is situated close to Ellis Island and was a natural place for immigrants to put down roots. The area was well known for its linens, lace, silk goods and embroidery, as well as for pastries and sweets. People made a home here, but decades later it would be all but wiped off the map with the construction of the Battery Tunnel and World Trade Center. The city's Arab American community dispersed, but many moved across the East River to Brooklyn. And businesses like Sahadi's are still trading today. Originally a merchant shop opened by Lebanese immigrants in 1895, it's one of the few places in New York that traces its history back to Little Syria. The company's website quotes a New York Times article from the turn of the 20th century. It describes a wonderful shop, this of the merchant Sahadi, with native wines and liqueurs, American groceries, swords and lamps, and glass bracelets of many colors. But Little Syria preservationists have a new problem. This is the site of 5 World Trade Center, destroyed in the attacks of September 11th, 2001. There's a plan to build a luxury 275-meter tower here with more than 1,300 rental units, backed by real estate companies Silverstein Properties and Brookfield Properties. While about a quarter of the apartments are described as permanently affordable, working-class people are likely to remain priced out of the area, where rentals can cost between $2,500 and $6,000 per month.
We see this incentivization of luxury construction after 9/11 of these high-rise buildings that further demolish historic buildings and further make it impossible for low-income, middle-class people to live in this part of Lower Manhattan.
Added to this, architecture firm Cohn Peterson Fox has proposed a design for the structure that has incensed activists like Todd Fine. The company says on its website that the building's 2-story masonry windows will reflect the late 19th century architectural heritage of Little Syria.
We don't want some sort of token use of Little Syria motifs or architectural motifs in the building. We want an affordable building. That's what will do justice to the Little Syria neighborhood.
But developers have defended their plans. In a statement to The National, a spokesman for the 5 World Trade Center development team said their project is expected to generate more than 1,900 permanent jobs and $1.9 billion in economic output. We are proud to work with our government partners to deliver an unprecedented 300 permanent, deeply affordable homes with no public subsidy in a community that badly needs them. Todd Fine has been fighting back. He and prominent members of the Arab American community have signed a joint letter to New York Governor Kathy Hochul, calling for a building featuring cheaper housing instead. They say that's the only way to pay tribute to Little Syria.
5 World Trade Center absolutely is the last stand, both for the Little Syria heritage or the idea of Little Syria as an immigrant neighborhood, but it's also a last stand for Lower Manhattan itself. Lower Manhattan is losing its soul. The best way to honor Little Syria is to allow people to have these opportunities to participate in American society and have places to live. Imagine if those could be 1,300 apartments for working class, poor and middle class people. It would totally transform what we think of the World Trade Center, and would be such an extraordinary opportunity for Lower Manhattan, and meet these ideals that Governor Kathy Hochul and the mayor of New York say that they want for Lower Manhattan. 5 World Trade Center could achieve it in an amazing way.